Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much, Heather, for that introduction. It's great to see you. It's a real bonus coming back here to meet you and meet up with you again. And I must say, of all the flattering things you said, one thing which is not necessarily flattering, but I actually live in Beijing. I took a decision after 27 years in government and diplomacy to stay in Beijing because I wanted to continue to bear witness to what was going on in China. I think it's the most significant development in our age, in our lifetime, and the opportunity to continue to look at it and study it and talk about it at first hand was something I wanted to continue. So I'm just back from Beijing, a bit croaky from an overnight flight, but otherwise delighted to have this opportunity to meet with you all. What I'll do is talk a little bit about the politics. Heather's touched on some of that, and then talk about the economy and the economic outlook. I apologise for some of you who may have heard me speak at PricewaterhouseCoopers last year, because much of what I said last year has come to pass, and there will be things you've heard before, but I'm delighted that I've got some calls correct. That we're doing a free trade zone discussion today also is of interest to me, because my very, very first trip to China was in May of 1985. I can't believe it's nearly 30 years ago. It's, as they say in China, 时间过得很快. Time passes very quickly. And I went on that trip partly for familiarisation with China, but also to write a report for the Australian government on the special economic zone called Shenzhen. And you may recall that in 1983, Deng Xiaoping, as part of the opening up policy, created a number of special economic zones on the coast of China, principally to attract foreign capital into export-oriented manufacturing. So I went to Shenzhen, and in those days you had to walk across the border from Hong Kong into Shenzhen, which consisted of nothing much more than muddy rice paddies, and it was quite wet and humid in May. And of course we had no diplomatic representation in southern China, and so the enterprising colleague from the consulate in Hong Kong somehow tracked down what seemed to be the only Australian in Shenzhen in those days, who was a very dodgy businessman living in a half-constructed hotel, to take us around and introduce us to things. And I won't go through all the detail, but there was a lot of wading through muddy paddy fields to office buildings and so on, which were not operating. And electricity was out that day because there was alternate day rationing of electricity, which all of which led me to write a very long and considered tome for the Australian government, which predicted that Shenzhen would never work. So one needs to be cautious about forecasts and commenting on developments in China in particular. So look, a year ago, when I was last speaking with PwC, I said that it's my judgment then that Xi Jinping had emerged as the strongest leader in China since Deng Xiaoping. He had both the main levers of power, the party and the military in his hand, but more importantly than that, he didn't have a group of elders looking over his shoulder, second-guessing him and so on. He was his own person. And he also had impeccable princeling credentials from his father, who was a leading general in the Long March and often regarded as having saved the Long March when they finally got to Shanghai province. Significant authority comes to him and is in his hands because of the family connections. And so I thought that, as I said, he was the most powerful leader in China since Deng Xiaoping. A year on, he may even be more powerful than Deng Xiaoping was, because Deng had to negotiate his way still through former colleagues from the old revolutionary generation. Xi Jinping has demonstrated that he is fully in charge and in command, and that he has the will and the capacity to exercise the power. I, for one, was very surprised that Bo Xilai was given a lifelong sentence. I thought that was a very, very big call, and I think that underscores and demonstrates Xi's power. Since coming into office, or into the formal positions of power, he's set about a very deliberate and purposeful campaign to what they call rectify the party, to deal with abuse of power by junior party officials or lower level party officials, to clean up all the waste and extravagance and the crazy gift giving and so on that has actually gone a long way to destroy the credibility of the Communist Party in the eyes of most people in China. And most importantly of all, and also for political reasons, to deal with his enemies, he has embarked on the most serious anti-corruption campaign we've seen in modern China. At the outset a year ago, he said that he was not just about catching flies, but they were going to catch tigers as well, to which most of the Chinese population, who have become very cynical about these sorts of things, sort of yawned and said ho-hum. But he has done it. He did it with the sentencing of Bo Xilai, although Bo Xilai had been arrested before she became party secretary. But he has pursued both high-level corrupt officials, many of them have been removed, but also he's used anti-corruption, as they always do in China, to deal with political opponents and challenges. And the most important one so far has been the campaign against Zhou Yongkang and his people. Zhou Yongkang was the member of the Standing Committee up until the change last year. He was responsible for internal security, and you can imagine the power in a system like China that flows from that. And she has set about systematically rounding up on corruption charges all of the close associates of Zhou Yongkang, including a governor of Sichuan province and Zhou Yongkang's son. Whether Zhou Yongkang actually goes to trial or not is a moot point. There's massive speculation as we speak in Beijing about this. It seems to me personally, but then I was wrong on the Bo Xilai case as well, that it would be very destabilising to actually go through with the trial and imprisonment of someone that's senior. It's just simply never happened. But you could argue that it never happened in the case of Bo either. Some senior people in the Chinese system have said to me that Xi Jinping has Zhou Yongkang's body. I mean, he has no power left. All his associates are in prison. So there's no need to chop up the body. So if you've got the body, why chop it up? Which means, why put him on trial? But it may be also to demonstrate his authority and power, and that he can do it, that he will do it. So this is a space to watch. But again, even that things have come to this point further underscores the point I'm making about the authority and power which Xi exercises. Now, to what end? What motivates Xi? What is he really trying to achieve? I think it's very important to understand that Xi feels upon his shoulders the weight of his father and the Communist Party history. And I can guess that every day Xi wakes up and he's shaving in front of the mirror, he's thinking, I am not going to become Gorbachev. This is not going to be a rerun of the collapse of the Soviet Communist Party. He is motivated in these campaigns and by his political agenda, and also, as we'll touch on it, by his emphasis on economic reform. He's motivated by strengthening the Communist Party, because he believes only the Communist Party can govern China, and China's future lies with the Communist Party. So any talk of reform and liberalisation, it all has to be understood in those terms. Now, he's done 4 principal things that stand out politically. He very carefully, cleverly, as a retail politician, he has gone both to the conservative side and to the reformist side of the political spectrum. On the conservative side, he's exercising a more muscular Chinese foreign policy, whether it's the islands with Japan and the South China Sea or closer association with Putin and Russia. It's all about a more muscular, assertive Chinese foreign policy. That keeps the military happy and conservatives happy. Secondly, he's cracked down on freedom of speech, and there is a much greater caution on social networking. He's tightened up on social networking, use of websites and so on. And thirdly, related to that, there's been a crackdown on defence lawyers, discussion of constitutionalism, which basically is about rights, and academics that lecture and teach in those areas as well. So that's been, I think, quite deliberate. I don't know what she believes or thinks. I said you never really know with any of these people. But it's been quite deliberate, I think, to deal with what could be seen as potential conservative challenges. And then on the other side, on the reform side, with the third-party plenum document that came out November last year, he has emphasised a strong commitment to economic reform, acceleration of economic reform. That document is very, very interesting. For the first time ever, the Chinese Communist Party has said that the market is to be the driving force of the economy, and that private enterprise and private property should be at the same level excuse me, as state-owned businesses. There's a lot in it. I mean, there's a lot in it about giving peasants use rights to the land, which they're freely able to trade. And there's 88 specific decisions, and every specific decision leans towards, some more heavily than others, some with more specificity than others, but all leaning in the same direction towards a greater role for the market, greater market forces, and greater role for private enterprise and private property. So it's very reformist in tone and style. I mean, a lot of important social things. They have done away with the one-child policy. They have gotten rid of the black prisons and the reform through labour camps. A lot of things that needed to be done have been done. So it's a very complex pattern of policy, but to my mind, it all leads in one direction, and that's continuing to strengthen the role of the Communist Party. And Xi, of course, at the apex of that system. But I don't think so much personal motivation as this very, very deep belief in the party as a saviour of China. And never underestimate, as many of the Chinese guests here today would tell you, filial piety as an extremely important thing, even today in China. So Xi really is honouring his father in his own mind, in what he's doing. So how they're going with the economy. There's been a lot of negative sentiment about China's economy. I don't understand why. And if you're a regular reader, here's my plug of my piece in Alan Kohler's Business Spectator every fortnight, new piece coming out next Tuesday, you'll see that I've consistently, for the best part of 2 years, rejected the notion of China's slowdown, China collapse, China's hard landing, soft landing. And I've also had a go as much as I can at how skittish and short-term so much of the commentary in the financial press and banks and so on is on China. It's a joke to get excited over a couple of basis point changes on a quarterly or monthly growth figure. The data are simply not that robust to enable you to do that. And certainly you shouldn't be selling or buying stocks on the basis of that. At the same time, I think the data are a very good indication of broad orders of magnitude and trends. And last year that's just completed, China had 7.7% annual growth year on year. What does that mean? Somewhere above 7. A lot above 7, a little above 7, I don't know. But that most importantly, is the same as they did the year before. So China has had 2 years of, by global standards, very high growth, unchanged. There's been no slowing whatsoever over 2 years. The slowdown, to the extent it happened in 2012, and there had to be a return to more sustainable rates of growth following the huge spike in 2009, 10, 11. So there's nothing strange or disturbing to my mind in the numbers as they're coming out of China. And China has, I think, hit a space of sustainable but high rates of growth. Remember also that China is the second biggest economy in the world. So this is an extraordinary rate of growth coming off that base. And the Chinese economy today is twice as big as it was 7 years ago when I first went there as ambassador. So in the last 7 years of my life, I've lived through the doubling of this enormous economy to where it is today. And 7% off that sort of base is a very significant growth rate and has direct implications for us. I come back to that point about the data are reliable in terms of indicators of broad orders of magnitude. So I'm fairly relaxed about the growth rate. I think people should calm down about relatively minor fluctuations from month to month or quarter to quarter in the growth rate. Just to wrap up a bit quickly now, because Bill's going to talk about the Shanghai Pilot Free Trade Zone, and something that really comes out of this new reform period. I just want to quickly tick off on 5 main drivers of productivity growth, which I won't go into for the sake of time, but just so you have a sense of why I'm still calling myself a Pamplona economist when it comes to China. I'm still running with the bulls. And just quickly, first thing is rural urban migration. 300 million people going out of the countryside into the cities over the next 15 or 20 years. It means that urban productivity, labour productivity is higher than rural productivity, so productivity will continue to grow as a result of massive urbanisation. Setting to one side what that means for the demand for raw materials and energy to support all these cities that are being built. And currently, as we speak, there's 200 airports being built in China. So there's a lot of stuff to be done still. Secondly, China has got a lot of